Joined today to look through all of those are Jonathan Isaby, who is the editor of the website Brexit Central, and the Financial Times journalist Miranda Green, who's also the former press secretary to the then Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown. Welcome to you both. I said that the comments by Nick Timothy weren't helpful because it's been pointed out by our lobby, or my lobby colleague Rob Hutton of Bloomberg, that Boudica or Boudica ended up losing to the Romans and poisoning herself. So is that really what Nick Timothy
Well,
wants?
I think Nick Timothy mentions himself in the article that Boudica doesn't come off well in the end. But I think the thrust of what he's saying is that, in terms, he says, Theresa May needs to tell the EU, quote, to get stuffed. Now, of course, Nick Timothy was her advisor until the general election last year.
Yeah, that went well, didn't it? Yeah.
Well, it didn't go very well for him, and that's why he left office.
Yeah.
But I think
why should we listen to his advice now?
I think there's a lot of Tories who'd say that what he's saying about Brexit is exactly right, and he's saying that the Lancaster House speech was what set out the kind of vision the Prime Minister should be pursuing. And in fact, in the Lancaster House speech, which obviously he had a hand in writing, it actually warned of the dangers of going down a Chequers-style deal where you end up having bits of membership of the EU not in control of your laws and with potential barriers to the way you're doing things within the UK, which is what the EU is trying to force by splitting Great Britain and Northern Ireland in some respects.
All right, Miranda, time to go to war against the Europeans.
It's a completely mad piece. I mean, it's like a drunk at closing time, sort of saying that he's going to have everybody, fists out. And this is actually a moment when we have to either do a deal or walk away, and no deal is not in the national interest. So it's unhelpful on several levels, unhelpful for the whole nation, I would say, not just to his former boss in number 10. I think the key thing to remember, as you've pointed out, is that this is the guy who encouraged Mrs May to set down incredibly inflexible red lines in that Lancaster House speech.
That's a speech Jonathan liked.
Well, absolutely. I'm sure that
actually,
Jonathan's side of the argument would have celebrated that.
Well, it was celebrated by most Tory MPs at the time.
Yes, but the nation is not Tory MPs. We had a referendum. The people decided on a narrow majority to leave the EU. They didn't decide to sever all ties with our closest allies, neighbours and our main trading partners. And that is the position Mrs May should have taken from the beginning, to unite the nation around a compromise. Sadly for her, she's now trying to force through a compromise that pleases nobody far too late.
So what about the analysis? I mean, basically, Polly Toynbee and Rachel Sylvester saying similar things, which is that Mrs May has only herself to blame. Not that gets the country very far, but she has only herself to blame for the situation she finds herself in.
Well, that's right. And Rachel in the Times goes through all of the different groups who are against her for different reasons and points out that she is really almost alone now in recommending this plan. So we've got the Democratic Unionist Party against her. We've got Ruth Davidson saying, no, I won't accept this. We've got the pro-European Labour MP saying that for various reasons, which it seems to me are quite hair-splitting, that they won't support her compromise deal.
What's
and
outrageous?
At the end of it, she may not have a deal at all. And you contrast that with the fact that the rest of the EU has held together, kept its line, been unified, completely the opposite of what the Brexiters told us.
What's outrageous about what Rachel Sylvester has written? She says that there's all these politicians in the UK putting party concerns above the national interest. What the DUP, what Tory Brexiteers, and indeed Ruth Davidson, who is no Brexiteer, are putting above everything is the national interest, the interest of the nation. Because what the EU are trying to do is to put Northern Ireland in a different position from the rest of the United Kingdom, which actually would be in breach of the Good Friday Agreement, which is something that Nick Timothy points out.
Well,
and the suggestion here is that the EU can do no wrong in this. The EU is trying to
the EU
drive a
didn't
stake
pick
through
this
the
fight,
United
did
Kingdom.
they? I mean, it's us who want to leave. The EU's position is they'd like us to stay. So you can't say that they are being aggressive towards the UK. It's us who wants to withdraw from there.
Well, I don't think that's the UK being aggressive towards the EU. It's simply the UK saying, after 40 years of this experiment, actually it's not for us, and we want to have an amicable departure. And in that respect, the UK can stand on its own 2 feet, having made a decision at the referendum to then go forward.
Even if there is an economic cost, which is pretty much accepted by government papers, of just severing all ties with Europe.
Well, it's not a case of severing all ties with Europe. We're going to continue trading with each other. We're going to continue.
Under what terms? We don't
well,
know.
We will see what terms. But it's this idea that this is some kind of hostile severance of any relations with our nearest neighbours.
Battle of Hastings. I mean, that is hostile, whether you like it or not. You carry on.
I was going to say that both Polly and Rachel do actually make an interesting point that's significant in terms of how this plays out in the Commons, which is what will the Labour MPs do who might be minded to support a May deal. I think this is very interesting because several of those who you might have thought might help her out and help her over the line, because of course the last time we were in similar territory during the Maastricht era for John Major, you know, the votes of the opposition.
Well, and indeed joining the EC originally in the 1970s.
Absolutely. But the noises coming from those Labour MPs who you might have thought would help Mrs May out have not been very positive, I have to say, because they're slightly obsessed with this idea that we won't stay in the single market. It seems to me that they should really think about whether no deal is better than supporting a partial maintenance
same goes
of our...
to the Liberals, of course.
Well, absolutely. Well, I would recommend them all to think hard, because if you say, oh, it's this or Remain or it's this or no deal, you might get the opposite of what you think you're going to get.
Let's move on. Who should preside over this? Very strong support, just talking to Emily Thornberry, for keeping John Bercow. What do you think, Jonathan? Because clearly the case made by Kevin Barron is that he should go.
John Bercow, I think, has been a very, very good speaker, and I think I'm probably in a minority of people on the right of politics who take that view. Yeah. He's been a reforming speaker.
Yeah, but, you know, Harvey Weinstein was a good film producer. Didn't stop him having an end put to his career because of his behaviour.
I'm not sure that comparison isn't necessarily helpful to John Bercow. I think, you know, clearly systems have to change. I don't know whether he can be held necessarily directly responsible for a culture that has been there for decades, if not centuries, frankly.
What do you think?
I think the fact that a lot of MPs have had it in for Bercow for a long time muddies the waters here horribly, because clearly we do need a culture change.
This has been a report. Well, let's be clear about this. It's not been MPs doing this. This was Newsnight speaking to people who had worked in the House of Parliament, saying they'd been bullied. A QC's investigated it and has come back and said there is a case to answer.
No, absolutely. But I think the calls for Bercow to go, unfortunately, that there are mixed motivations there.
He also said he would have gone by now when he was elected. He said he would serve 9 years.
I think that if, you know, Dame Laura Cox, who did the independent report, you know, she's calling for a fresh start, and it might have to be seen as such under a new speaker. But I do think
there's an argument to say delay the fresh start till after Brexit.
Will we ever get a fresh start? There'll be no moment after Brexit. We'll be talking about this for 10 years.
Certainly, I think the Speaker has made clear privately that he will depart next year once Brexit has happened as of the end of March next year. He said it privately, I think, and I think, you know, again, it's a bit like the idea of changing the Prime Minister right in the middle of the Brexit negotiation, that it's probably not a very clever thing to do, to change the person at the very top right in the middle of a very key moment.
OK, thank you both very much indeed.